Let's talk a little bit about hoplite crests. Crests are such an iconic part of ancient Greek armament and really play their part in adding something grand, intimidating and epic onto the hoplite armour. The issue comes though is that we really don't know much about these in terms of their actual construction. Now there are three main styles of crests that we really see appearing throughout the archaic and classical periods. That is the sort of most commonly depicted longitudinal crest, one that goes front to back. We have the very iconic archaic style J crest, the candy cane-like hook, and my personal favourite, the transverse crest, which is also the most intriguing out of all of these. Now the horsehair crest is of course the most iconic and most commonly depicted style of crest. We see this being used even before the archaic period, but it is not the only style of crest feature that we see these helmets possibly being adorned with. We see other various styles, from very extreme cases such as this Etruscan find that literally has an entire ram on the helmet, to we sometimes see feathers, horns and antlers, metal horns, sometimes even in collaboration we see crests and horns, which is kind of cool, or crests and feathers, which is kind of cool as well. But overall what we're going to be focusing on today is the horsehair crest. We're going to talk about the styles and rough evolution of them. We're going to touch on the major styles of crests that we see from the sort of heart of the hoplite period, from the archaic through to the classical. We're going to talk about construction. How were they made? Do we know how they were made? What are the leading construction theories? And just an overall gist of ancient Greek crests. Were they signifying rank? Did they have any practical or military purpose? Were they purely ceremonial? Were they not actually fought with? That's what we're going to touch on today. So straight off the bat, what is the purpose of a crest? And can we really say? Well, there is a lot of misconceptions that get projected onto the ancient Greeks from the later Romans, who use crests to symbolize rank. For instance, centurions having transverse style crests is often assumed, and there's a whole sort of debacle about transverse crests originating from Sparta and being the symbol of a polemarch. And all of these other things, which I've actually done a purely dedicated video on the transverse crest, which I will link in the description if you want more details on this. We have absolutely no evidence at all in an ancient Greek context to state that crests had any form of rank indication. That's just really what it is. You can try and pick your way there through basically trying to prove your own bias, but we have no period depictions or evidence or descriptions at all that indicate that these crests played any significant role in the identity of either a battle leader, like a strategos or a polemarch, a king, or anything like that. So just get that straight off the bat. These seem to purely be decorative or intimidation purpose in an ancient Greek context. And crest adornment on helmets is something that is done basically throughout all of history. From the medieval period through to the ancient period, we see crests being adorned. And something else that many people will often project or state as being likely is that these were purely ceremonial decorative, that they would not have fought with these crests because they were merely super impractical, which really isn't the case. And this is something that's really interesting. As I said, we see decoration being so vitally important and prominent in armors all across human history. Why is that? Well, as I said, these don't seem to have any military purpose. So what is the purpose of them? Well, for one is decoration, right? They look cool, they make you look bigger. They link back to horses in a way, right? A very notable and noble and remarkable animal in the eyes of the Greeks, a symbol of status perhaps as well. But intimidation and looking grand and intimidating can be incredibly useful on the battlefield. And crests do that. They add, half a foot to a foot onto your height. That can make you look huge. And the people that say that these things are really impractical, I would say, haven't really worn a helmet that is adorned in a crest. Okay, these things, when made properly, you don't even notice that they're on there. And they really don't interfere with any practicalness that you need to do with moving spears or swords around at all. But they do add such a powerful presence onto that stature, onto what you look like, that can have a massive role on your own mentality, right? It makes you feel more intimidating and sort of larger than life, inhuman in a way. And it can have that effect on your opponents, right? It dehumanizes you, and that can have a massive impact. Linking back to my video that I did on this psychological impact that armor has, crests come into that massively. Things that make you look big, intimidating, and grand can have a massive psychological impact in these battles. We have to remember that these battles are arguably more psychological than physical, in a way. Pretty much all of these battles end with one side turning and fleeing. The victory conditions of most battles wasn't who could kill the most of the enemy, it's who didn't run away first. So intimidation, status, looking good was really, really important for ancient warriors, and crests were a massive asset to that. So touching on that as well, were they ceremonial? We have no real reason to believe that, except for the fact that us as modern people sometimes deem them to be impractical. Almost universally throughout period depictions, we see crests in combat, and people often say, is that artistic license? You could make that point, but again, there's just no real reason for us to assume that. Crests was something that had been used in combat for ages. Practical tests show that there isn't really anything negative about having a crest on your helmet, and as I mentioned, they have a big psychological impact for you and your opponents as well. We also have plenty of remains of crest fastening systems on surviving helmets, from small holes where something was either pinned or perhaps tacked or even sewn directly into the helmet. We see hooks and pins that you might slot a crest into. We see ringlets that stuff might be tied to. And something else that we can see as well is a slight change in the patina of the bronze, so the oxidization of the bronze on certain helmets that can indicate where a crest once was. And most practical experimentation has shown that one of the best ways to fully solidly attach a helmet crest is with a form of glue. So a pitch or even a wax can work, which could explain why many helmets don't have visible signs of crest attachment. It's just they were simply glued. That crest is just glued on, for example, and it works incredibly well. So that's just a brief rundown of crests. They were almost certainly used in combat. They almost certainly didn't have any rank indication, at least none that we can categorically state with much evidence at all, and their primary purpose seems to have purely been decorative, or to make you look grand and intimidating. Now let's move on to the styles. There are quite a few styles of crest, and we'll start with sort of one of the earliest, which is the J crest. Now in this case, this is quite stylized. This is of course a swan, and this sees a rather tall crest, and this is very, very iconic and symbolic of the archaic period. This crest is in use, all throughout the 6th century. It seems to fade out of use coming into the 5th century, but it's a very cool and very iconic crest type. For me, it is actually my least favorite, but I mean, they're all really awesome. And we see some, like this case being quite stylized, being a swan, and some of them a little bit more simple. But this seems to have just been an archaic fashion, something that actually originates before the archaic as well. We can see in the geometric period, J crest, similar to this being used. Next up, this is by far the most iconic and most commonly depicted style of crest. This is your longitudinal crest, the crest that goes front to back. This basically appears all throughout hoplite warfare, well from the archaic through to the classical into the Hellenistic. This is sort of a timeless crest, and by far the most commonly depicted as well. Can't really go wrong with a longitudinal. Again, very horse mane reminiscent. Then you have my personal favorite in terms of looks, the transverse crest, the crest that goes side to side. By far the most rarely depicted style of crest. Again, I did do a dedicated video on the transverse crest, as it is by far the most complex, and this video isn't supposed to go super in depth on every specific helmet. So if you are interested in the transverse crest specifically, then I'd highly recommend you to go check out that video where I detail this one. But in short, artwork, basically over 90% of our depictions are hoplites from the side. You never see transverse crests being depicted from the side because they are, of course, front to back. Almost all of our depictions of hoplites from the front show transverse crests. So the question is basically, how much does art show hoplites from the side? And therefore, if 95% of our hoplite depictions are from the side, that automatically means that 95% of our depictions will not have a transverse crest. So essentially, I think it's likely that these were more common in real life than art would have us believe, but we can't say for sure. They seem to be the rarest, even in statue form. We have a few transverse crests in statue form, but seem to be the rarest out of all of them. But in my opinion, I absolutely love the presence that the transverse crest has. It looks very intimidating and imposing, almost lion-like. I often liken it to a lion's mane versus a horse's mane. Absolutely awesome looking there. So how are these crests made? This is a very annoying question for those of us that want to accurately recreate ancient material culture, because we just don't really know. We know that they're made of horsehair. We have writers who talk about crest makers, but it doesn't really specify how were these crests made, and likely there are multiple ways of construction, as with most things. This one here is your sort of go-to reenactment style. This is a very simple wooden crest box, painted in a geometric pattern. This can be any pattern that we see a large variety, and essentially each piece of hair is just bundled up and stuffed into holes drilled. Seems to work. Seems a little bit complicated to make, in my opinion, but I think that wood or bone or something of that nature, any organic material that would rot away, is fitting for a crest. Wood makes sense. It is somewhat easy to carve. You can fit it directly to helmets, and it's paintable. That is the same method that I then did when I made my J crest, as it's holes drilled into a wooden carved swan with the tufts of hair drilled into it. The crest that I am most happy with that I made is this one. Now this is actually a tablet woven crest. Now what's interesting, in lots of typically archaic artwork as well, we see what seem to be double crest boxes, which I've mimicked here by having a leather crest box that is essentially stitched to the tablet woven one. Now, why did I choose tablet weaving? Is this a little bit interesting? Well, I was looking at lots of depictions and thinking logistically what makes sense for a helmet. And it would make sense if something was flexible, right? Because you have to fix these to many helmets. And as we know, there are crest makers as a trade. Therefore, with something like a wooden crest box, you have to specifically fit it to a helmet, right? It has to fit it very, very well. So with something like this that has flex, you can mass produce and fit it to multiple different helmets. That's then supported by artwork, where thankfully we have one artist who depicted a fellow holding a crest upright and it's hanging straight. So that would indicate that this particular crest is flexible. Tablet weaving as well is something that can give you geometric patterns and symmetric geometric patterns as well. For instance, in this case, triangles. In other cases, you could do Greek keys or anything like that. And for me, it just checked a lot of boxes. It's very, very light. For perspective, this crest is under £1. This helmet with the crest is about £2. So very, very light. Again, not very impeding. Pretty much all artwork shows crests being very, very thin, which I've managed to do here. Long tails, which I'm quite happy with how this one managed to come out. So overall, do I think that I've struck the nail on the head here? Have I got the answer? No, I don't think I can say that at all. But I think that something like this is a pretty safe construction theory for what we know. And do I think that all crests were made this way? No, I don't. I think we would have seen a variety of crest constructions, but for me right now, this is my favorite out of all the ones that I have and have seen. It just seems to check a lot of boxes. It's light, it's flexible, it can be mass produced by a crest maker. It can be sold to people easily, with being able to be adorned specifically to the helmet because it can flex. And it looks about right. Now, another construction theory that's getting progressively more popular in the reenactment world is that I believe was originally actually designed by my friend Yanis. However, this has been picked up and modified and built on by my friend Andrew. And this is a leather woven checkerboard crest, which I think looks the part a lot. It's cool. It's basically a leather box where you weave the hair through, and that gives you the checker pattern that we so commonly see. I like this. I think it's cool. I think it makes sense. I think it's pretty safe to assume, as with tube and yoke style armors and as with a lot of things, this wasn't a one-size-fits-all affair or factory mass-produced. I think you would have seen variations, possible style changes. Again, as I said, in the archaic period, you often see that double crest box situation. We don't typically see that as much in the classical period. I think there are different ways of making these crests. Right now, my favorite one, and one that I'm going to continue to be doing, is the tablet woven one. But I think that, hey, a wooden crest box, wood was definitely available. We know wood was used quite a lot in this period. Makes sense as well. The leather woven crest box can explain the checker pattern that we see, again, as an organic material. I would imagine decently expensive. And the checker pattern could also be achieved by the woven thing. But anyways, another theory that I really, really quite like. Something else that you will notice with these crests is that they have stitching in the hair. Well, what is this for? Well, this is fundamentally to give strength to the crest. most of these crests, if you don't put stitching in, will flop a lot. This allows you to have quite a tall crest, right? Something that can stand up, provide support, and keep them from the dreaded crest droop, or at least help prevent the dreaded crest droop. And we also see in period depictions what could look like stitching in crest. We sometimes see lines or dots or all sorts of things along the crest. Now, some of us have interpreted that as beads. I myself have done a beaded crest. However, the more that I look at it, the more that I actually don't think beads were the case, because it has a tendency of separating the hair too much into almost what looks like tufts. And that's just really not what we see in the period artwork. That's not to necessarily call out anyone who's done that with beads. Again, I think it looks really, really good. I just don't think that it quite looks like what the Greeks are showing us these crests looked like. So stitching works very, very well. It is a very, very simple fix, and just practically it works incredibly well. And to me, that resembles a lot of these sort of hash lines. But again, maybe small beads were used as well. I've just found that in most of the recreations that I've seen, and that even that I made with the beads, is it did just sort of space out the hair too much for me. It doesn't quite fit that very iconic silhouette. So there you go, that was a brief rundown of crests. If there is interest in these, I will be happy to do a dedicated video on each style of crest. Again, I did that on the transverse crest, as that is sort of the most controversial and interesting crest. So again, highly recommend checking out that video if you're interested in that. Thank you very much for watching. A special thanks to our members and patrons who continue to support the channel. Really, really means a lot. Thank you so much for that. If you would like to yourself support the channel more than you do, then please consider checking out that Patreon page or YouTube memberships. Liking these videos, sharing these videos, subscribing, of course, is awesome. And I'll hopefully catch you in the next one.